It's Sunday, September 14th, 2025. And, while the markets might be taking a breather, geopolitics, not so much. It never really stops. So forget the brunch menus for a bit. We're here tracking the signals that actually matter from yesterday's intelligence brief, Saturday, September 13th. Our mission, as always, is to help you cut through all that noise, get you properly informed, fast, and really understand the so what behind these global moves.
Absolutely. And there's quite a bit to unpack from Saturday. It's a really fascinating mix. We've got some pretty major diplomatic shifts, especially concerning the Middle East. Then there are these unexpected security flare-ups in a couple of regions, South Asia, Europe too. And of course, some really pressing environmental news that, well, we can't ignore. It was definitely a busy Saturday on the global stage.
It really was. Just to give you a quick rundown of the headlines we'll be digging into. At the UN General Assembly, a huge majority, 142 countries, backed the New York Declaration. It calls for, irreversible steps towards a two-state solution. Big statement. But the U.S. and Israel, they voted against it. So that's significant. We also saw Pakistan and Egypt pretty strongly condemning that Israeli airstrike in Doha targeting Hamas leaders.
Right, pushing for an emergency meeting of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Exactly. Then, shifting gears a bit, former U.S. President Trump came out urging NATO members to stop buying Russian oil. Warned about sanctions, the usual playbook, but EU officials immediately flagged concerns.
Yeah, warning it could seriously spike energy prices. That's a big worry.
Definitely. And in South Asia, a really tough day. 19 Pakistani soldiers were killed in clashes near the Afghan border. Just underscores how fragile things are there.
A stark reminder.
And nature threw a curveball, too. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. It triggered tsunami alerts, but thankfully, no reports of casualties so far.
Good news there, at least.
Yeah. But on the environmental front, some pretty sobering data. Latin American air pollution hit a 26-year high. The report links it to life expectancy losses similar to smoking. That's quite something.
It really is. And these are just the highlights. You can already see how, these threads connect across diplomacy, security, economics, environment. We'll try and pull those threads together for you, show how these distant events can actually ripple out and, affect things closer to home.
Okay, let's start our first deep dive segment then, focusing on the Middle East. Those diplomatic fault lines seem to be really active right now. So that big move at the UN General Assembly yesterday, 142 out of 193 countries endorsing the New York Declaration, is pushing for irreversible steps towards a two-state solution. And importantly, it condemns the Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, and criticizes Israel's actions, the siege and bombardment. But as we mentioned, the U.S. and Israel voted no. Quite a split there, despite the numbers.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is that massive show of support, right? Almost global consensus. But then you have the key players, the ones directly involved, standing firmly against it. So for you listening, the real question becomes, what does this actually signal? Does this huge vote, without main parties on board, actually change anything on the ground? Or does it just, highlight how deep the divide really is? It gives certain groups, certain blocs, a lot of diplomatic ammo maybe, but it could also just harden positions, make that two-state solution seem even further away unless something big shifts in, say, Washington or Jerusalem.
That's a really good point. It's symbolic, definitely. Gives weight to that narrative. But without any clear path forward, any enforcement mechanism, or like you said, a change from the U.S. or Israel, well, it risks just being another piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
Feels almost like a missed chance to build some actual momentum.
Exactly. And then you throw in the military actions happening alongside this. Well, it gets even more complicated. Like that Israeli strike in Doha, we saw Pakistan and Egypt come out really strongly against it. They're accusing Israel of hitting Hamas leaders there, but also, crucially, of violating Qatar's sovereignty. And they're saying it directly undermines the mediation efforts that Qatar's been involved in.
Right. And they're pushing for that emergency OIC meeting now.
Yeah, exactly. They want to get the Organization of Islamic Cooperation together to figure out a collective response.
So it's this real push and pull, isn't it? You've got this global call for peace from the UN, and then you've got military actions that critics are saying just derail the whole process. It's a very tricky landscape.
Absolutely. And if you step back and look at the bigger picture, you see that delicate balance or maybe imbalance. The UN opens one door, with that broad support. But then, boom, Military action potentially slams another door shut, complicates mediation, and triggers calls for a collective response from the OIC. It just shows how incredibly fragile any diplomatic effort is in that region. Every single move, political or military, has these immediate ripple effects, and that directly impacts, millions of lives and the stability of a region that's critical for the whole world.
Yeah, absolutely. And amidst all this tension, though, there were a couple of other, maybe quieter signals, like that forum in Riyadh on legal diplomacy. Saudi officials were emphasizing rule of law, human rights, saying it's key for stability, both at home and for international relations, sort of projecting a certain image.
Right, a different kind of messaging.
And then in Dubai, there was the first Iran Fest, celebrating improving UAE-Iran ties, focused on cultural connections, people-to-people stuff. Looks like a bit of a thaw there.
Yeah, and those quieter things, like the Riyadh Forum talking human rights or the festival in Dubai, they're important reminders that the region isn't just one thing, right? It's not a monolith. They show these other currents, maybe alternative paths for, easing tensions, even if they feel fragile or get drowned out by the louder conflicts. So for you, it means remembering that behind those big conflict headlines, there are also these efforts towards cooperation, towards stability, even if it all seems a bit contradictory sometimes.
Right. And these diplomatic and regional pressures, they don't exist in a vacuum, do they? They often spill right over into economics. So let's shift focus now to the economic front. Energy markets got quite a jolt of rhetoric yesterday. Former U.S. President Trump came out demanding NATO allies stop buying Russian oil, full stop. And he warned about fresh sanctions if they don't comply. It's a pretty aggressive stance.
Very aggressive.
And EU officials, they were quick to respond, cautioning that a boycott like that could send energy prices soaring.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are pretty stark. Russia still supplies something like 25% of the EU's crude oil, cutting that off suddenly. Yeah, analysts were saying Brent crude prices could jump by double digits. That's significant.
It really is. So what's the thinking here? Is this purely about hitting Russia's war funding?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, is the primary goal really just cutting off Russia's revenue? Or are there, maybe deeper geopolitical motives at play? Especially considering the potential economic pain this could cause for NATO members themselves. Remember, there are already those G7 price caps in place trying to limit Russia's income.
Right.
So you have to wonder, would this new demand actually hurt the alliance more than it hurts Russia, particularly those industries in Europe that rely heavily on energy? For you, the consumer, this isn't just politics over there. It potentially means, higher heating bills, higher prices at the pump as these supply shocks ripple through the global market.
Yeah, that's a serious worry, especially heading into winter in Europe. Okay, sticking with global economics, but shifting focus now. China. They hit back against those ongoing U.S. restrictions on computer chips. Beijing launched these big anti-discrimination and dumping investigations into the U.S. semiconductor industry.
Right before those planned bilateral trade talks, too. Timing is interesting.
Definitely. And China's arguing the U.S. actions violate WTO rules, World Trade Organization principles.
And this isn't just talk. Looking back historically, when China announces these kinds of probes, it usually puts downward pressure on U.S. semiconductor stocks. We often see those indices drop maybe 1% to 3%.
Okay, why is that?
Well, investors basically get nervous, right? They anticipate potential trade barriers, maybe China restricting market access, just general uncertainty. And that directly hits the sales forecasts and production plans for those U.S. chip companies. So for you, whether you're a consumer waiting for the next gadget or maybe a manager dealing with supply chains, this could mean longer waits for advanced chips, more scrambling to find other sources, or just managing increased risk.
Yeah, it really brings home the interconnectedness. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic now. France. There's a proposal there that really highlights these ongoing debates about wealth inequality. The left-wing coalition, New Peace, they've basically said their support for the new prime minister depends on adopting what they're calling a Zuckerman tax.
Named after Gabriel Zuckerman, the economist, yeah.
Right. And the proposal is a 2% annual tax on wealth over 100 million euros.
It's a pretty direct response to all the talk about inequality across Europe. They estimate it could bring in, 10 to 15 billion euros a year for France. Yeah. So for you, if you're investing in European markets, this isn't just some political debate. It could potentially shift where capital flows, how investments are made. It affects the whole investment climate, really. And you can bet other countries in Europe are watching this very closely. It might influence their own tax policies down the line.
So yeah, looking across energy, trade, wealth, it's clear these aren't just separate issues. They're all linked. signals of a global economy that's, well, incredibly dynamic right now.
Absolutely. Supply chain managers really need to be thinking about chip disruptions, maybe looking at alternative suppliers. Investors probably need to reassess their portfolios, especially in tech and energy, factoring in these new layers of geopolitical risk.
Okay, before we move on, I just want to quickly mention again where these deep insights are coming from. This analysis is powered by NextSight and their fantastic open-source intelligence platform, Site Connect. NextSight is a leader in global investigations and intelligence. Their platform is customizable, lets you tailor reports right to your specific needs. They handle everything from really complex cross-border investigations to high-stakes corporate intel. The quality of their work is just consistently top tier. Precise, fast, always corroborated. Really impressive stuff. You can find out more about them at www.next-site.com. All right, let's shift gears now to security. Yesterday was, unfortunately, a particularly deadly day in South Asia. 19 Pakistani soldiers were killed. Really tragic. Happened in 2 separate clashes with Islamist militants near the border with Afghanistan.
Yeah, and this situation, it really ties back directly to the instability coming out of Afghanistan, doesn't it? That security vacuum, as the report calls it, left after the Taliban takeover. Plus, you have Pakistan accusing the Afghan Taliban of sheltering fighters from the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban. And we've seen violence escalating pretty much since Kabul fell back in 2021. For you, this isn't just a distant conflict. It highlights how these regional instabilities can have wider impacts. Think about supply routes for China's big Belt and Road projects that run through there. It's just another reminder of how interconnected global security is, even when conflicts seem far away.
Absolutely. And Europe wasn't immune to security challenges yesterday either. Direct challenges to NATO airspace, actually. We saw 2 separate incidents involving Russian drones. First, a Russian drone flew into Poland. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio called it unacceptable, possibly deliberate. Poland said it was definitely no accident.
Strong words.
Yeah. And then another drone, this one apparently from Russia's attack on Ukraine, actually entered Romanian airspace.
Okay.
Romania scrambled F-16s in response. This comes after previous incidents where debris landed in Romania.
Right, which led them to pass new laws allowing their military to actually shoot down drones now.
So what's the bigger picture here with these drone incursions?
Well, zooming out, these probably aren't just, random mistakes or isolated incidents. It looks more like persistent testing, probing of NATO defenses along that eastern flank. It definitely highlights the escalating tensions there. And when you see countries like Romania passing laws to shoot down drones, that signals a real hardening of their stance. It underscores that these incursions are seen as a very real, very present threat to their sovereignty and to collective security. So anyone watching European stability, these are flashing yellow lights, right? Signs of continued, maybe low-level escalation that always has the potential to flare up.
Definitely concerning. Okay, let's turn to the U.S. now. Some developments around free speech that are, frankly, quite troubling. The report mentions over 30 people, teachers, journalists, even government employees who were investigated or actually fired. Why? For things they posted on social media about the assassination of conservative influencer Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, and it wasn't random targeting either.
No, apparently conservative activists were compiling lists of people and then pressuring their employers. And some far-right figures, like Laura Loomer and Representative Clay Higgins, were reportedly making threats. Things like ruining careers, banning critics from platforms.
What's really compelling, maybe disturbing here, is seeing political polarization bleed so directly into people's jobs, into employment decisions. It really throws up that difficult question about where the line is between free speech and what's considered acceptable public discourse. And it puts employers in a really tough spot, potentially facing legal action or serious damage to their reputation. Companies really need to have clear social media policies in place to navigate this stuff, because it looks like these kinds of pressure campaigns aren't going away.
Yeah, a very thorny issue. Just a couple other quick notes from the U.S. brief yesterday. The White House officially rebranded its defense bureaucracy. It's now called the War Directorate.
Following the Pentagon's earlier renaming, yeah. Seems like a rhetorical shift.
Exactly, signaling this move towards a wartime posture, at least in language. Also, on the energy front, some bipartisan lawmakers introduced the SPEED Act, aimed at streamlining permits for energy projects.
Though environmental groups are already raising red flags, saying it weakens oversight, so that'll be a debate.
For sure. And lastly, a federal judge extended an order blocking the deportation of unaccompanied Guatemalan children, cited due process concerns, and said the government hadn't been accurate in its statements. So, That legal battle continues.
Lots of moving parts stateside, too.
Okay, finally, let's look at the environment. Some pretty stark data came out yesterday.
Yeah, looking at this environmental data, it's quite concerning, actually. New figures from the Air Quality Life Index show Latin American air pollution is at a 26-year high. And get this, the report says the impact on life expectancy is comparable to losses from smoking.
Wow, that really puts it in perspective. It does. Specifically, it says people in the region could gain, on average, up to a year of life if air quality met WHO guidelines. And in Bolivia, it's even more dramatic, potentially more than 4 years gained.
4 years is huge.
Huge. And this isn't just an isolated issue. The report also noted that those Canadian wildfires doubled particulate pollution, and the smoke reached well into several U.S. states.
You know, this raises that critical point. We often focus on the immediate crises, the big headlines. But these chronic environmental problems, like air pollution, they pose these massive long-term risks to public health, to economies, and they will almost certainly drive stricter regulations down the line. You just can't ignore public health impacts like that.
No.
Poor air quality, it's a silent killer, really.
Yeah.
And the knock-on effects for healthcare systems, for worker productivity, even for, people moving away from polluted areas, they're profound. So for you, this just highlights how urgent it is for governments, for industries to really invest in cleaner air, cleaner energy solutions.
Absolutely. And just as we were digesting that, nature reminded us of its raw power, too. That magnitude 7.4 earthquake off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula yesterday. It did trigger tsunami alerts, which is always scary, but thankfully, no reports of casualties or major damage came through.
That's a relief.
It is. But the context is important, too. This was apparently an aftershock from a much larger earthquake, an 8.8, that hit back in July.
Right. So it just underscores how seismically active that region is.
Exactly. A constant reminder about the need for preparedness, for resilient infrastructure in those earthquake zones, and a reminder that while we're dealing with all our human-made problems, the planet keeps doing its thing.
So true.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground from Saturday's brief. What does it all boil down to? What are the main takeaways for you, our listeners?
Yeah, looking back, I think 3 clear themes really stand out from yesterday's signals. First, you've got this intensifying geopolitical rhetoric. Lots of strong words, diplomatic maneuvering, especially around energy in the Middle East. But crucially, the source material suggests it hasn't, quote, translated into kinetic escalation, meaning major military conflict yet. But the potential is definitely simmering.
Right. Keyword.
Exactly, SECTA. Second, we're seeing these persistent regional security threats, the violence in Pakistan, the drone incidents in Europe. They're stark reminders that global stability is, well, pretty fragile in places. It needs constant attention. And third, those ongoing environmental challenges, the air pollution data, the earthquake. They highlight these profound long-term risks, both humanitarian and economic, that demand serious, sustained focus and action.
And why should you care about all this? Well, because none of this happens in isolation, right? These signals, they have real downstream effects on energy prices you pay, on the supply chains that bring you goods, maybe even on social stability in your own area. Staying informed isn't just about knowing what happened yesterday. It's about trying to understand what might happen next and how it could actually impact your world.
Precisely. And this intelligence isn't just for, thinking about things. It's meant to inform action. The report itself even suggests things like hedging exposure to oil price volatility, maybe by using futures contracts.
Practical steps.
Yeah, or for businesses engaging in scenario planning for chip supply disruptions, looking for alternative suppliers before a crisis hits. These are the kinds of concrete actions that can help mitigate risk and build resilience in what's clearly a very volatile global landscape.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Saturday, September 13th's Intelligence Brief. We really hope this has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced picture of the world's moving parts today. Hey, don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Spotify if you haven't already, and we always appreciate it when you share your thoughts, like, comment, spread the word. It helps others find the show.
In a world that doesn't really pause for the weekend, keeping track of these interconnected global threads is just so important. And maybe the real insight isn't just in looking at each event separately, but in seeing how they kind of echo each other, how they influence things happening continents away. It all shapes the future we're heading into.
Indeed. And remember, the depth of analysis you get here is powered by Nexsight. They're the ones turning all those fragmented signals into actionable strategy. So stay informed, stay sharp. We hope your Sunday is maybe a bit calmer than a trading floor on a Saturday, but hopefully just as insightful. We'll be back tomorrow for another deep dive.